Good afternoon, I'm Rob Boskamp, and you're listening to South Texas Midday. Thank you for joining me on this Tuesday, December 9th. Corpus Christi City Council is meeting today at City Hall. The city manager and Corpus Christi Water will provide an update on water supply projects. Several ordinances of interest on the agenda include the authorization of submitting several grant applications, first in the amount of $30 million to the Texas Water Development Board to provide costs of the Nueces River Groundwater Wells project. A second application would be in the amount of $16 million to the TWDB to provide for the cost of Mary Road's pipeline upgrades. Another ordinance would amend Corpus Christi Code to reduce the speed limit on Staple Street between Saratoga Boulevard and 250 feet north of King Trail, as well as the speed limit on Whitecap Boulevard between Park Road 22 and Windward Drive, providing for penalty and publication. Several motions to move on the agenda include the approval of the 2026 annual audit plan and the recommendation that City Council approves the creation of an incentive pay program for professional certifications and licenses in the City Auditor's Office. Full meeting agenda and public comment session signups are available online at corpuschristitx.gov. Harlingen city leaders look to approve a new comprehensive plan within the next year, which includes consideration of new economic incentives and reimagining the downtown district over the next 2 decades. The Rio Grande Valley Business Journal reports that downtown is already a public improvement district, which imposes a higher tax assessment on property owners to be reinvested in the commercial corridor. But the city is considering establishing a new Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone, which captures a portion of property tax revenue when a building is redeveloped and uses the savings for infrastructure improvements. Harlingen Economic Development Corporation CEO Orlando Campos said that the TIRZ could be a helpful tool in the development in the area. Harlingen already operates 3 TIRZs, one south of the Valley International Airport, another in the medical district near Harlingen Medical Center, and the third surrounding the interchange of I-69 East and I-2 near Via Vista Mall. The comprehensive plan would transform public park space by adding more trees and pedestrian-friendly areas, extending its hiking and biking trail along the Arroyo Colorado River, and incorporating flood mitigation into public landscaping. The city of Harlingen already oversees 1,200 acres of parks and 2 grants to purchase up to 3,000 trees. In state news, Dallas Democrat Colin Allred announced yesterday he's bowing out of the U.S. Senate race. As KERA's Toluwani Osabamowo reports, he's now running for a newly drawn U.S. House seat.
Allred will take on his successor, Julie Johnson, in the race for the 33rd Texas Congressional District. The district was redrawn during a Republican-led statewide redistricting push earlier this year. Allred says he's pulling out of the Senate race to avoid a likely runoff if Dallas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett runs against him and Texas House member James Tallarico. Crockett's expected to announce today if she'll kick off a Senate campaign or run for another term in the House. Allred says avoiding a runoff would maximize chances of a Democrat winning the Senate in November.
KERA's Toluwani Osabamowo reporting. Crockett officially announced her campaign against incumbent Senator John Cornyn in Dallas yesterday, but it will be an uphill battle. A Democrat hasn't won a statewide contest in Texas since 1994. Still, Crockett urged her supporters not to let that deter them.
For most of us, a Republican-controlled Texas is all we've known. But we cannot let that diminish our faith and belief in what can be.
Meanwhile, on the GOP ticket, Cornyn takes on Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Meanwhile, back in Victoria at Saturday's HEB Christmas tree lighting ceremony, Congressman Michael Cloud stopped by to surprise brother Gary Moses with a congressional honor. Cloud honored Moses with the Patriot Award as he read the statement he shared to the U.S. Congress, honoring Moses' legacy of service to the community.
This was presented into the congressional record. It says, Mr. Speaker, I rise today with great pride and honor to honor one of the most beloved sons of Texas' 27th Congressional District, Brother Gary Moses of Victoria, Texas. For more than 50 years, Brother Gary has been the heartbeat of Victoria and the entire Crossroads region. As a longtime educator at Patty Welder Middle School, a legendary radio voice, Magic 95.9, and Victoria's undisputed ambassador of joy, he has touched countless lives with his infectious smile and genuine love for every person he meets.
Cloud gifted Moses with a medal for the Patriot Award, a plaque from Congress, and a printed version of his statement. In sports this week, we start off with college basketball. UT-RGV women's will host second-ranked Texas tomorrow night at Bert Ogden Arena. UT-RGV men's will host UT-Arlington on Thursday night. Texas A&M Kingsville men's and women's teams will travel to UT of the Permian Basin on Thursday. TAM-UCC men's team will host Dallas Christian on Friday. The Islanders recently won their Southland Conference opener against Lamar 57-49. TAM-UCC women's team will kick off Southland Conference play on Monday. They travel to Beaumont to face Lamar. In high school football, Refugio will take on Joaquin and Houston in a 2A Division I state semifinal game this week. Sinton defeated Cuero 45-42 in the 4A Division II regional championship this past Friday. They move on to face West Orange Stark in the state semifinals in Houston later this week. They were one of a handful of teams still left in the playoffs. The other, Edna, lost a heartbreaker to Llano 38-35 in a 3A Division I state quarterfinal rematch in San Antonio last week. Most users of virtual reality tools do so for entertainment, but Texas Health has put them to use as part of its alcohol addiction recovery program in Mansfield. In this week's episode of Vital Signs, Behavioral Clinical Officer Dr. Ken Jones explained to KERA's Sam Baker how the VR tool works.
It allows us to provide an immersive experience for patients in a realistic high-risk environment, such as a party or a social gathering, where they're able to practice some of their refusal skills and some of the things that they've learned in treatment in the safety of a controlled environment. It utilizes exposure therapy, which has actually been around for many years. But exposure therapy previously used to be in vivo. So a therapist would actually accompany a client to a high-risk environment, and then they would practice those skills live.
What was it about that step that caused a look at virtual reality?
It was relatively inefficient in terms of the ability for a clinician to accompany a therapist to perhaps like the parking lot of a liquor store, or even some of the triggers that might present themselves in driving by a certain area that the brain pairs with having utilized substances previously. So in a treatment environment, it's actually ideal for us to be able to spend some time, preparing them for the relapse prevention piece of treatment, and then being able to provide metered exposure in the safety of that environment to allow them to practice those skills before they discharge and go back into the real world setting.
So how has it worked so far?
A lot of times the reaction is they're surprised, because when they start out, they go, this is really just a video game. And by the end of the simulation, they recognize, perhaps I need to take treatment a bit more seriously, or, I really need to practice this a little bit more, because oftentimes it's not until you've reached that exposure that you realize what types of strategies that you're going to need to be able to navigate that successfully.
I admit I've never used a virtual reality tool, but I think most people think of it as something that's used for entertainment. I was just wondering if the recovering addict, how much they have to suspend disbelief first in order for this to work.
The ability for that environment, especially in an immersive environment. So, the headset, obviously kind of places you in that environment visually, but it also has speakers directly over your ears. We also use olfactory triggers. So we actually have synthetic scents that replicate common alcohol or drugs. So we've got synthetic marijuana, we've got different types of alcohol that we can use to actually trigger that smell when they reach a particular environment. So for example, if in the headset they're walking into a bar, as they get close to the counter with the alcohol, we can trigger the smell of a margarita as they're there. And so really the body does respond quite quickly to that type of exposure.
Now, this doesn't totally replace the real life interaction, does it?
No, it's preparatory. The ideal is to avoid these environments. However, especially as we head into the holiday season, the reality is it's difficult to engage with family and friends in our society without being exposed to at least alcohol. This allows us to realistically help prepare them for those situations that perhaps are unavoidable, but allow them to have a better chance at successfully navigating those without falling into relapse.
Is there any patient you would not recommend virtual reality for?
If someone has a history of seizures, and there's a few individuals who experience some vertigo-like symptoms with the use of virtual reality. And so those are things that we screen for.
What's the future ahead for the use of virtual reality in this type of treatment?
I believe it's a really exciting time. Previously with patients in a group setting, sometimes we would have them close their eyes and imagine if they were in a particular setting to try to achieve the same type of physiological activation. And this allows us to customize the environment for each individual so that it simulates as close as possible, that scenario without the real life risk.
Dr. Ken Jones is a behavioral clinical officer for Texas Health Behavioral Health. And that is the latest news and information on South Texas Midday. I'm Rob Boskamp. Your community arts calendar and more is on the way.